the moment aliens witnessed humanity's true predator instincts unleashed. The cargo bay doors of the Accord vessel had not even finished opening when I felt it. Not fear, not wonder, just that old familiar tightening behind my eyes, the quiet in my chest that meant something was watching me and deciding whether I was worth worrying about. I was Commander Asham Mercer, 38 years old, 12 years in the United Earth Navy, and in that moment, standing at the threshold of the most important diplomatic event in human history, I was being scanned like a piece of luggage. The Velkari were tall, that much the briefings had gotten right. 7 feet lean, with 4 arms arranged in 2 stacked pairs and eyes that sat wide on a face shaped like a rounded blade. They moved slowly, deliberately, the way animals move when they have never needed to rush because nothing has ever chased them. Their skin shifted color at the edges, pale gold fatting to silver near their fingertips. Beautiful, honestly. Terrifying, honestly. Both at the same time. There were 11 of them waiting at the end of the docking corridor, arranged in a precise formation. I walked toward them with my crew of 4. Lieutenant Yusuf Akafar on my left, Navigator Claire Hutton behind me, Systems Officer Dan Priestley to my right, and Medic Leon Farrow at the rear. 5 humans. 5 small, soft, short humans who breathed oxygen and bruised easily, and had crossed 7 light years in a ship held together by 12,000 bolts, and 1 very stubborn chief engineer who had stayed behind at the dock because he refused to wear formal clothes. The lead Velkari, Ambassador Sothra, according to the briefing files, stopped 3 meters from me and tilted his head. It was a precise movement, measured. I had read that Velkari communicated partly through posture. That tilt meant he was categorizing me. "Commander Mercer," he said, in clean, accented English. Their translation technology was extraordinary. "Welcome aboard the Accord flagship, the Sarova's Reach. We are pleased to receive humanity's delegation." "Ambassador Sothra," I said, "on behalf of Earth and all human colonies, thank you for this invitation. We're honored to be here." He looked at me for a long moment before responding, not rudely, just thoroughly. "You are smaller than the briefing suggested," he said. Behind me, I heard Dan Priestley exhale through his nose. It was the sound he made when he was working very hard not to say something. "We are," I agreed. "We tend to be." Sothra nodded, apparently satisfied with that answer, and gestured for us to follow. As we walked, 2 Velkari flanked us at a respectful distance. I noticed they were watching our hands, not our eyes, not our faces, our hands. I filed that away. The Sarova's reach was enormous. We passed through corridors that hummed with quiet energy, past viewing ports that showed the deep dark of open space, through common areas where other species of the Accord turned to observe us. I recognized a few. The Dreth, squat and heavily built, with bioluminescent patches along their shoulders. The Kavani, which moved in pairs and shared a mild telepathic link. The Ferrith, who looked almost insectoid and communicated in soft harmonic clicks that their translators turned into flat, careful words. Every single one of them looked at us with the same expression: curiosity, mild surprise, and beneath both of those things, a kind of gentle condescension that they were clearly not even aware they were projecting. We were new here. We were small. We were, in their estimation, a curiosity rather than a concern. A Velkari xenobiologist named Arith So met us in the medical wing for what Sothra called a standard wellness assessment for newly admitted species. It was essentially a full biological scan. Arith So moved around us with a handheld device that emitted a faint hum, occasionally making quiet notes in Velkari script. He was polite, professional, and he narrated, perhaps not realizing we could all hear him. "Bipedal, bilateral symmetry," he murmured. "Redundant organ structures notable. High pain tolerance indicators possible. Skeletal density suggests low gravity origin, though records indicate standard gravity homeworld. Musculature is denser than expected for a classified non-threatening species." Yusuf, standing 2 feet from me, turned his head just slightly toward mine. I caught it in my peripheral vision. I shook mine once very slightly. Not yet. Arith So moved to Leon, our medic, and scanned his eyes. Ocular structure, forward-facing binocular vision, depth perception oriented for close-range precision tracking. He paused, made a longer note. Classification confirmed, prey-class organism with some convergent predator traits, non-threatening. Leon smiled at him. It was a very still smile. "Thank you," Leon said pleasantly. Arith So looked up, blinked, and nodded, apparently satisfied. That evening, we were seated in the Accord's Grand Assembly Chamber for the opening ceremony of humanity's probationary membership. 37 species, represented by their delegates, arranged in a ring of curved seating around a central platform where Sothra stood and delivered a speech about unity, shared knowledge, and the future of cooperation across the galaxy. It was a good speech. I paid attention to most of it, but a portion of my attention stayed on one Velkari delegate who sat across the chamber from me. She had not looked at me once during the ceremony, which would have been normal, except that I had caught her not looking at me in a very specific way. The kind of not looking that is actually very careful watching conducted through peripheral vision and brief, precise glances that snapped away the instant they might be noticed. Her name, according to my briefing tablet, her listed role was cultural observer. Her body language said something else, though I could not yet say exactly what. After the ceremony, during the reception in the adjoining hall, Sothra found me near the viewport. We stood together in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars. "Humanity's admission has been debated for some time," he said at last. "There were concerns." "What kind of concerns?" I asked. He considered his answer with the measured care I was already beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "Your species has a history of conflict," he said. "By Accord standards, you are very young and very energetic. There was a school of thought among some senior members that humanity might be better observed from a distance for another generation or two before formal contact." "What changed their minds?" "The energy readings from your weapons tests 3 years ago," he said simply. "The Accord thought it more prudent to have you inside the conversation than outside it." I looked at him, he looked at the stars. "That's a very practical reason," I said. "The Accord is a very practical organization," he replied. Later that night, lying in the narrow bunk of my assigned quarters, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the day. The scans, the categorization, the words prey-class organism spoken softly and without malice and somehow landing harder for that. The Velkari watching our hands, Velsun not quite watching me. I was not angry, I want to be clear about that. I was not angry, I was something quieter than that, something more patient. Because here is the thing about being underestimated. It is uncomfortable. It presses on something old and certain inside you, some deep knowing that says, this person has the wrong idea, and that pressure does not make you loud. It does not make you dramatic. It makes you very, very still. It makes you wait. I closed my eyes. My crew was 4 corridors away, each in their own bunk, each carrying the same quiet weight. We were 5 humans on a ship of thousands, a species freshly admitted to a galactic club that had already decided what we were. They had no idea what they were looking at. 3 days later, the distress signal arrived. It came from a colony on the edge of Shreth space, a small Dreth settlement called Valkareth, 60,000 people. The signal was standard distress protocol, but the final message embedded in it was only 4 words in Dreth, which the translators rendered as, "They are not stopping." The mood on the Sarova's reach changed immediately and completely. I had never seen 37 species simultaneously go quiet before. It was like watching every light in a city dim at once. I asked Yusuf what he knew about the Shreth. He pulled up his notes, he always had notes, and told me in a low, steady voice. The Shreth did not negotiate. The Shreth did not take prisoners. Every species in the Accord had, at some point in their history, lost something to the Shreth. And the memory of it lived in them, the way old injuries live in old bones. I listened carefully. I noted the fear in the chamber around me. I noted the way the Velkari delegates stood closer together without seeming to realize they were doing it. Then I looked at Yusuf, and Yusuf looked at me, and we did not move closer together. We both went very still, and we both, without saying a word about it, started thinking about what the Shreth's attack patterns probably looked like, and where the gaps in those patterns might be, and what 60,000 lives were worth in terms of risk. It is a strange thing, I thought, to be the calmest people in the room. But we were, and I was beginning to understand why. I would like to tell you that when the Velkari admiral, a tall, silver-edged officer named Varsal, called the Joint Fleet briefing, he opened with a plan. Something bold. Something that said clearly, we are going to Valkareth, and we are going to handle this together, and every species in this room is a full and equal part of that mission. But what he actually said was this: humanity's vessel will serve as an observation platform. Your crew will document Accord tactical response for the purpose of post-mission analysis. You are not to engage directly. I looked at him. He looked back at me with perfect professional calm. Understood, I said. Yusuf beside me said nothing. Claire behind me said nothing. Dan and Leon said nothing. We had all heard it. We all filed it away. The Accord fleet that departed for Valkareth was substantial. 43 vessels, ranging from the Sarova's reach at its core to a spread of mid-range combat ships representing 12 different species. Our vessel, the Eden's Passage, was a United Earth Navy ship, fast and well-armed, and it slotted into position at the rear of the formation with the quiet dignity of something that had been politely told to stay out of the way. I sat in my captain's chair on the bridge and watched the fleet jump into faster-than-light travel, star trails bending at the edges of the viewport, and I thought about what I had observed over the past 3 days aboard the Sarova's reach. The Velkari were brilliant engineers and diplomats. The Dreth were physically powerful and extraordinarily loyal to their own. The Kavani, sharing thoughts in real time, made decisions faster than any individual species could manage alone. The Ferrith had sensor technology that could detect a ship through a moon. Every species in the Accord had something extraordinary to offer. But I had watched them during the distress signal. I had watched the moment fear entered the room, and what I had seen was this: every single one of them in that first moment of shock had looked for somewhere to retreat to. Not a tactical retreat, a biological one. The kind baked into the nervous system over millions of years of being something's prey. Humans have fear too. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I was afraid. I had been afraid since the moment the distress signal played. 60,000 people facing something that did not stop. That fear was real. It was in my body, a tight, bright thing sitting behind my sternum. But it did not make me want to go smaller. That is the difference. That is the part that, at that point, I had not yet found the words to explain to anyone outside my species. We came out of faster-than-light travel 200,000 kilometers from Valkareth. The planet was visible on the forward screen, a rust-red world with 2 moons, and even from that distance the sensor readings were not good. The Shreth fleet was larger than expected. Varsal's voice, transmitted across the combined fleet channel, was carefully controlled, professional, but I had been listening to him for 3 days, and I heard something new in it, a tightness at the edges of his vowels. The Shreth fleet numbered 60 ships, the Accord had 43. The numbers were not catastrophic on paper, but Shreth vessels were designed for one purpose, heavily armored on every surface, with weapons configured not for precision but for overwhelming force. They did not try to outmaneuver you, they tried to push through you, past you, into whatever was behind you. Every species that had evolved as prey, I was realizing, feared that quality most of all. The thing that does not stop, that does not flinch, that simply keeps moving toward you regardless of what you do. It triggers something very ancient and very deep. Yusuf leaned close to me and said, quietly, "They're heading straight for the civilian population centers, not the defensive platforms, the cities." "I see it," I said. "Varsal is going to order a standard defensive perimeter," he said. "Watch." Varsal ordered a standard defensive perimeter 30 seconds later. I pulled up the tactical overlay on my personal screen and studied the Shreth formation. It was aggressive and blunt, the kind of approach that assumed the target would try to hold a line. It assumed the target would think defensively. It assumed, in other words, prey behavior. "They've never fought anything that came at them," I said quietly. "Not to anyone in particular." Claire Hutton turned from the navigation console. "Say that again." "The Shreth, look at the formation. It's designed to punch through a defensive line. There's no contingency for an attack from behind. The rear third of that fleet is structurally exposed." I traced the overlay with my finger. "They expect everyone to run or to hold still. They don't have a plan for something coming after them." The bridge was quiet for a moment. "We're observation platform," Dan said. "I know what Varsal said," I said. Leon spoke from the medical station, which he had repurposed as a secondary analysis console. "Those are 60,000 people on that planet." "I know that too," I said. I opened a channel to Varsal. He answered immediately, face filling the screen with that precise, controlled expression. "Commander Mercer," he said, "all is in order, please maintain your—" "Admiral, I need you to look at the Shreth rear formation," I said. I sent him the overlay. "The rear third is exposed. If something came at them from the direction they least expect, at high speed, using terrain from Valkarath's second moon as cover until the last possible moment, they would not have time to reconfigure. Their front formation would be forced to split. That opens a channel directly to their command vessel." Varsal studied the overlay for 4 seconds, which, I was already learning, was a long time for him. "You are proposing a counterattack," he said. "I'm proposing a hunt," I said, and I heard the word come out of my mouth and recognized it and did not take it back. His eyes were unreadable, all 4 of them, arranged wide on that blade-shaped face, completely still. "Your vessel is a single ship, Commander," he said. "I know. If the Shreth fleet redirects—" "They won't," I said, "because they'll see one small ship coming at them and they'll classify it the same way your xenobiologist classified us, non-threatening, and by the time they recalibrate, we'll be through them." Varsal looked at me for another long moment. On the channel, I could hear the background sounds of his bridge, the quiet hum of his crew, the muted alarms from the ongoing Shreth advance. Then he said, "You are not authorized for direct engagement." "No," I agreed, "I'm not." Another silence. "I am not able to stop you from maneuvering your vessel," he said carefully, "for the purpose of closer observational positioning." I held his gaze. "Understood, Admiral, we'll get a better look." I closed the channel. My crew was already moving. Claire's hands were on the navigation controls. Yusuf was pulling up targeting systems. Dan was rerouting power from non-essential systems to engines and weapons. Leon had locked down the medical bay and strapped in. They had all heard the conversation. They had all arrived at the same place I had. No one needed to be told twice. No one asked if this was a good idea. There is a thing that happens in a human crew when the decision is made and the direction is clear. Something settles. Something that had been held carefully in place, patient and coiled, finally relaxes into motion. I had felt it before, in training exercises, in a border incident near the Mars shipping lanes, in a search and rescue mission in the outer belt where the math said we probably weren't coming back. It felt like calm, the deepest possible calm, the kind that lives on the other side of fear, not instead of it. "Claire," I said, Take us around the moon." "Aye, Commander," she said, and she was already doing it. The Eden's passage accelerated. Behind us, the Accord fleet held its defensive line. Ahead of us, Valkarith's second moon grew in the viewport. A gray and pitted rock that would hide us for exactly as long as we needed. On the tactical display, 60 Shreth ships pressed forward toward 43 Accord vessels and 60,000 people on a rust-red world. They were moving without hesitation, without doubt. They had never encountered anything that made hesitation feel necessary. I watched the display and thought, "You've never been hunted before." That was about to change. We rounded the far side of the moon at full acceleration. The Shreth rear formation filled the forward viewport. At this range, each ship was a dark, dense shape, armored and heavy, moving with the certainty of things that had never needed to be quick. "Weapons ready," Yusuf said. "Fire when we're in range," I said. "Don't stop, don't slow down, go straight through." "Straight through," he confirmed. I looked at the viewport, at the Shreth ships growing larger, at the dark space between them, the gaps that existed because no one had ever needed to guard them. "Let's go," I said. What happened in the next 11 minutes has since been analyzed by Accord tactical divisions across 14 species. They have produced, between them, over 200 formal reports on the engagement. I have read portions of several of them. They use words like unprecedented, aberrant, statistically improbable, and in one remarkable Dreth document, the phrase that translates roughly as, "They moved like something with nothing to lose and everything to gain." I am going to tell you what it felt like from the inside. The first 3 seconds after we cleared the moon, nothing happened. We were visible, we were incoming, and the Shreth rear formation did not react. It took me a breath to understand why, and then I understood completely. They registered our mass signature, our vessel size, our single-ship configuration, and they dismissed us. One small vessel alone coming directly at 60 warships. In their experience, that was not an attack. That was a mistake. Something lost, something fleeing, something that did not understand what it was flying toward. They gave us 4 seconds of free approach before the first targeting signals swept across our hull. "They've got us," Dan said, not alarmed, simply factual. "I know," I said. "Claire, variance pattern, keep shifting, do not give them a clean solution." "On it," she said, and the Eden's passage began to move in the subtle, constant, unpredictable pattern she had been developing in her head since we cleared the moon. Claire Hutton was the finest navigator I had ever served with. She did not fly by instrument. She flew by instinct, which is another word for 10,000 hours of practiced reading of space and motion, and the physics of how things move when they do not want to be caught. The Shreth opened fire. 3 ships in the rear formation, targeting simultaneously. The beams cut through the space where we had been a quarter second before. "They're adjusting," Yusuf said. "Faster than the Accord ships can," I noted. "Yes," he said, "but they're used to firing at things that are trying to get away." I understood immediately. They're leading their shots. "In the wrong direction," he confirmed, and there was something in his voice, something very quiet and very precise, that I recognized because I had heard it in my own voice before. Not excitement, not aggression, focus. The specific quality of absolute attention that arrives when the brain understands exactly what it is doing and everything unnecessary falls away. We were inside their formation now. 3 seconds in. The Shreth ships around us were large and close, their armor surfaces gray and scarred from decades of campaigns. They were trying to track us, but their targeting systems were calibrated for opponents that moved in predictable patterns, either holding still to fight or fleeing in straight lines. We were doing neither. "Primary target," Yusuf said. The command vessel, bearing adjusted. "Take it," I said. Our first shot hit the command vessel's engine cluster at the junction point between the primary drive and the lateral stabilizers. Yusuf had spent the approach calculating exactly where that junction was, cross-referencing 3 separate intelligence files and a partial scan we had taken on the way in. The shot was not large. It did not need to be. It needed to be precise. And it was. The command vessel lurched, not catastrophically, not destroyed, but damaged enough that its command functions partially interrupted, and for the Shreth fleet, command interruption meant coordination interruption. 3 seconds of uncertainty rippled through 60 ships. 3 seconds is a long time. "Accord fleet," I said over the open channel. "The command vessel is disrupted. Their rear formation has a gap at bearing 274. Window is approximately 90 seconds. What happened next was not what I expected, because what I expected was that Varsal would take 20 seconds to confer with his officers and another 20 to make the decision, and by then the window would be closing. What actually happened was that the Dreth ships moved first, immediately and without waiting for orders. 4 Dreth vessels punched through the gap in the Shreth rear formation and began engaging at close range, which is where Dreth ships excelled. Their thick hulls built for exactly that kind of brutal close-quarters exchange. Then the Kavani moved, sharing the tactical picture instantaneously across their linked crews. They coordinated a flanking maneuver that took less than 6 seconds to execute perfectly. Then Varsal ordered the full fleet forward. We were deep inside the Shreth formation by this point, moving through gaps that kept opening as the disrupted command structure failed to direct defensive responses in time. I want to be careful here about how I describe what we did next, because I have seen some of the Accord accounts call it reckless, and some of them call it brilliant, and neither word is quite right. What we did was patient. That is the truest word for it. We did not fly in rage. We did not move in excitement. We moved with the specific, deliberate patience of something that has assessed the situation completely and is now executing a plan one precise step at a time, and will continue executing that plan until it is finished. Yusuf fired 9 times in those 11 minutes. 7 of those shots hit exactly where he intended. The other 2 missed by margins so small that the Accord analysts later noted the error was within the threshold of sensor calibration tolerance, meaning effectively the miss was the instrument's fault, not his. Claire varied our flight path 247 times. She did not repeat a variance pattern once. Dan kept the power flowing. Every time something took a hit, every time a secondary system flickered, he was 3 steps ahead of it, rerouting, compensating, holding the ship together through pure mechanical knowledge, and the stubborn refusal to let anything fail that could possibly be kept running. Leon monitored all 4 of us in real time and said nothing at all, which is exactly what a good medic does when the crew is functioning at peak capacity. He sat with his hands loose in his lap and watched our biometric feeds and trusted us. At 11 minutes and 4 seconds, the Shreth fleet began to fragment. Not flee, not immediately. Shreth did not flee easily, but the command disruption, combined with the Accord fleet's breakthrough and our continued presence inside their formation, created a situation their tactical systems had not been designed to handle. They began to redirect. Individual ships breaking formation to address immediate threats rather than pursuing the original advance. Valkarith's defensive platforms, which had been holding desperately against the outer edge of the assault, found the pressure suddenly easing. The 60,000 people on the surface watched the Shreth fleet begin, slowly but unmistakably, to pull back. Varsal ordered a pursuit, then recalled it. Smart. The Shreth were retreating but not broken, and pursuit into Shreth space with a fleet that had taken some damage would have been a different kind of mistake. He held the line. He secured Valkarith. He let them go. I sat in my captain's chair and breathed. Around me, the bridge was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something large has passed through. Claire had her hands on the navigation console but was not moving. Yusuf was looking at the tactical display where the Shreth retreat was rendering in real time. Dan was running a damage report on secondary systems in the focused, methodical way he always did. Leon had come forward from the medical station and was standing near the viewport. None of us said anything for almost a minute. Then Claire said, "All primary systems nominal." "Copy," I said. "Hull integrity at 92%, Dan said. "We took 3 partial impacts, nothing critical." "Copy," I said. Yusuf said, 60,000 people on that surface." "Yes," I said. He nodded once. On the fleet channel, Varsal's voice came through, and for the first time since I had met him, it carried something that his precise, measured tone had not previously allowed. Not warmth exactly, something more careful than warmth. Something that said he was looking at a thing he had not expected to see and was taking his time forming an opinion of it. "Commander Mercer," he said, "the Accord fleet acknowledges the action of the Eden's Passage. Your contribution to the defense of Valkareth has been noted." "Thank you, Admiral," I said. A pause on the channel. "Your crew," he said, "are they unharmed?" I looked around the bridge. 4 humans, all present, all functioning, none injured. "We're fine," I said. "Thank you for asking." Another pause, longer this time. "I see," he said, in a tone that suggested he was beginning to. 3 weeks after Valkareth, the Accord called a formal debriefing on the Sarova's reach. It was not the kind of debriefing I was used to, which involved a room, some chairs, a recording device, and a direct officer asking direct questions. This was an event. 40 delegates, 12 senior admirals, and a panel of xenobiologists, tactical analysts, and cultural researchers from 9 different species, all assembled in the Grand Assembly Chamber, all there because of 11 minutes and 4 seconds of footage from our engagement with the Shreth fleet. I walked in with my crew, all 5 of us, and sat at a table facing the panel. I had worn my formal uniform, so had the others. We sat up straight. The lead analyst, a Velkari named Path, stood at the center of the panel and spoke first. Her role was listed as applied xenobiology, and she spoke the way people speak when they have prepared carefully and are still not entirely certain their preparation is sufficient. "Commander Mercer," she said, "we have reviewed the sensor footage from the Valkareth engagement 41 times. We have reviewed your crew's biometric data, recorded continuously from your medical officer's monitoring system during the engagement, cross-referenced with a full post-engagement physiological assessment. We have also spoken with several Accord crew members who observed portions of the engagement from nearby vessels. We would like to discuss what we found." "Of course," I said. She brought up the biometric overlay on the main display. 5 sets of readings: heart rate, cortisol equivalent markers, adrenaline analog markers, neural activity indicators, muscle tension readings. All 5 of us across the 11 minutes of the engagement. She pointed to the cortisol readings first. In all 5 crew members, what we classify as fear response chemistry was present at the start of the engagement. She looked at me. "You were afraid." "Yes," I said, "we were." "But look at what followed," she said, and she traced the line with her stylus. The fear response chemistry did not decrease. It transformed. It moved into a different channel, one that the Velkari physiologists had initially flagged as an anomaly because they had never observed it as a sustained state in an intelligent species before. "This is what our analysts are calling sustained predator-focus response," Path said. "It is characterized by reduced higher-order anxiety, increased pattern recognition capacity, narrowed attentional focus, and the specific hormonal signature that in most species we study is found only in apex predators during an active hunt." The chamber was quiet. "In all 5 of you," she said, simultaneously for the full 11 minutes. I looked at the display. There we were, rendered in lines and numbers, running through a Shreth fleet in a single ship, doing something that statistically should not have worked. Yusuf beside me, was looking at his own biometric line with an expression I could not entirely read. Something between recognition and something older than recognition. We also reviewed the footage itself, Path so continued. Specifically, the behavioral analysis team has prepared observations. She stepped back, and a second analyst, a Ferrith, took her place. The Ferrith's translator rendered its harmonic speech in that characteristic flat clarity. The human crew exhibited zero flight behavior at any point during the engagement, the Ferrith analyst said. This is notable because flight behavior is a nearly universal response in intelligent species at the point of direct threat exposure at this level. Even species classified as militarily capable, when placed inside an opposing fleet of this size without support, exhibit at minimum 1% flight response behavior. This crew exhibited none. Instead, behavioral analysis records the following: increased stillness in body posture, slower and more deliberate vocalizations, focused eye contact behavior between crew members, and what our analysts have classified as cooperative hunt-state coordination. A behavioral pattern previously recorded only in documented apex predator species across 7 worlds, never in an intelligent technological species. I was aware that every delegate in the chamber was looking at us. I was aware of Sothra, seated to the left of the panel, watching me with the same focused attention that Velson had used at the opening ceremony, except now it carried something different in it. Not surveillance. Reassessment. Pathso came forward again. What we are now discussing formally, she said, is a reclassification request. Humanity was admitted to the Accord under the xenobiological classification of Type 3 species, non-threatening, prey-origin biology with tool-use compensatory development. This is the classification applied to the majority of Accord member species. She paused. We are recommending reclassification to Type 7. A murmur moved through the chamber. I did not know enough about Accord classification to understand immediately what that meant. Yusuf, who had been doing his homework continuously since we arrived, leaned close to me and said in a very low voice, Type 7 is Apex Predator, technological class. There are 2 other species in the Accord in that category. Neither of them is in the room. I looked at Pathso. What does that mean practically? It means, she said carefully, that the Accord's existing protocols for Type 3 species, which include restrictions on independent military action, limitations on fleet size, and the observational role you were assigned at Valkarath, would no longer apply. You would be reclassified as a Guardian-class contributor species. And the downside, I asked. She blinked all 4 of her eyes, Commander. There's always a downside, I said. What changes that we might not like? Pathso looked at me for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, some member species will be afraid of you. I held her gaze. Some already were, I said. They just hadn't decided it yet. The chamber was very still. It was Velson who spoke next, the cultural observer who had not quite been watching me since the first day. She stood from her seat and addressed the chamber in Velkari, which the translators rendered as she spoke. I filed a report on the first day of humanity's arrival, she said. In that report, I noted the following. The human delegates displayed forward-facing binocular vision consistent with predator-class evolutionary origin. They displayed a specific stillness response to perceived assessment, rather than the anxiety motion response characteristic of prey-origin species. Their hands, when at rest, maintained a loose-closed posture rather than an open-palmed posture. And when I observed Commander Mercer specifically at the moment the distress signal was received, her response was not cortisol-class anxiety. It was focused attention. The kind that, in every other species I have studied, indicates the brain has identified a problem and is calculating how to address it rather than how to escape it. She paused. I flagged this report at the time as requiring follow-up. The follow-up was not considered a priority. I would like it formally noted that my report was correct. Sathra said with perfect composure, "It will be noted, Velsan." She sat down. The debriefing continued for 4 more hours. There were questions about our tactical decision-making, our communication patterns, our physiological baselines, our evolutionary history. One Dreth admiral asked Yusuf to describe what he had been thinking during the engagement. Yusuf looked at him for a moment and then said in his calm, precise way, "I was thinking about where the next shot needed to go, and then the one after that, and then the one after that." The Dreth admiral nodded slowly. "You did not think about the outcome." "During a hunt," Yusuf said, "you don't think about whether you'll catch it. You think about the next step. The outcome is a result, not a plan." The chamber absorbed that. Leon was asked about the medical data. He walked past, so through it with the patient, detailed clarity he brought to everything medical, and at one point said something that I think landed harder than he intended. "Fear doesn't shut humans down. It focuses us. It's not comfortable. Nobody enjoys it, but it doesn't make us smaller. It makes us more precise." Pathso made a very long note. Claire was asked whether she had been afraid. She said yes, she had been quite afraid, and she had used that fear to make sure every single variance in her flight path was faster and more unpredictable than it might otherwise have been, because fear, for her, meant she understood exactly how much she needed to not be where the weapons were going. The Ferrith analyst made a sound that the translator rendered as the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Dan was not asked very much, because the Accord analysts were not, at that point, equipped to fully appreciate what a human engineer in a functioning crisis actually does. But Admiral Varsal, near the end of the session, looked at Dan directly and said, "Your damage control during the engagement, 3 impacts absorbed with no critical failures. Our engineering analysts assessed a probability of less than 20% that your vessel could have continued operating after the 3rd impact. How did you achieve that?" Dan thought about it for a moment. "I know which parts of the ship can take more than they're supposed to," he said. "You learn that. You fly with something long enough, you know where its real limits are, not just the numbers." Varsal wrote something down. At the end of the session, as the chamber was clearing, Sathra approached me. We stood together again, as we had on the first day, looking out at the stars. Valkareth was not visible from this viewport, but I knew where it was. "I owe you an observation," Sathra said. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "The first day," he said, "I told you that humanity's admission had been debated because of your history of conflict, that you were young and energetic. I was being diplomatic. What I was actually saying was that we considered you unpredictable." "And now," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Now I understand that we had the category wrong," he said. "Unpredictable is what prey species are when they are frightened. It is random, uncontrolled. What you are is different," he paused. "What you are is purposeful, which is, I find, significantly more remarkable and significantly more worth understanding." I looked at the stars, at the dark between them, at the distances across which a signal had come saying they are not stopping, and across which 5 humans had gone to find out what they were up against. "We're not trying to frighten anyone," I said. "We never were." "I know," he said. "That is perhaps the most remarkable part." He left. I stayed at the viewport a little longer. 60,000 people on a rust-red world were alive tonight who might not have been. That was the fact I kept returning to, the one that felt most solid and most real. Not the reclassification. Not the chamber full of 37 species looking at us with new eyes. Not the reports being written. Not the history being made. 60,000 people. That was enough. That was everything. 6 weeks after Valkareth, I was standing at the viewport of my assigned quarters on the Sarova's Reach when the second signal arrived. In between those 6 weeks, quite a lot had happened. The reclassification vote had passed. Humanity was now a Guardian-class species in the Galactic Accord, Type 7, Apex Predator Technological Class, only the third species in Accord history to hold that designation, and the first to receive it within 18 months of first contact. The official announcement had gone out across Accord communication networks, and the responses had been, as Path, so had predicted, mixed. 4 species had formally requested that human vessels be assigned to their border patrol routes. They sent the requests within 48 hours of the vote, which told me they had prepared the requests in advance and were waiting to see which way the vote went before sending them. Practical. I respected practicality. 2 species had filed formal objections to the reclassification, not to our admission to the Accord, not to our participation in Accord activities, just to the classification level itself. Their objections were phrased carefully, diplomatically, with precise Accord language about procedural standards and the appropriate timeline for species assessment. What they meant, translated plainly, was, "We are not comfortable with this, and we would prefer that the uncomfortable thing remain officially smaller than it appears to be." Varsal had given me a copy of both objections without comment. I read them, noted what they were actually saying, and filed them away. 3 other species had done nothing official at all, but their delegates had begun making small, careful gestures of increased familiarity with my crew. An invitation to a meal shared in the Dreth fashion. A Kavani pair who had begun acknowledging Leon by name each morning. A Ferrith engineer who found Dan in the mechanical bay one afternoon and spent 2 hours showing him the design principles of their sensor array, which was, as far as I could tell, the Ferrith equivalent of a very warm welcome. People are people across species, I was learning. They respond to a new thing in roughly the categories you would expect: approach, avoid, or wait and see. Then there was Sathra. In those 6 weeks, Sathra and I had spoken 7 times. Not formally, not in chambers or debriefings. Informally, in the corridors or at the viewport, or once in the small observation lounge near the ship's botanical section, where he had been tending to a Velkari plant that looked somewhat like a fern made of glass and light. He asked questions. Real ones, the kind where you can tell the person is genuinely trying to understand rather than confirm what they already think. He asked about human history, about our wars and why we had fought them, and how we had stopped them, or whether we had stopped them. He asked about how a species that had spent most of its history in conflict had developed the concept of peace, and whether we believed in it genuinely or whether it was simply a practical arrangement, until something more pressing came along. I told him, honestly, that the answer was complicated, that humans were not peaceful by nature but were capable of extraordinary peace by choice, that the difference mattered and that we were still, as a species, working out exactly how to sustain it. He found that answer more interesting than a simpler one would have been. He also asked once what it had felt like inside the Shreth fleet. I thought about that one for a while before answering. It felt like clarity, I said at last. Everything unnecessary disappeared. It was just the problem and the next step and the people beside me who I trusted completely. It was not a good feeling exactly, but it was a clean one. He considered that for a long moment. Velkari experienced something similar, he said, but only in moments of extreme diplomatic crisis, when there is no more room for nuance and a decision must be made. We call it Velsoth. It translates roughly as the moment before certainty. That's a good word for it, I said. Yours happened in a warship, he said, in the middle of an enemy fleet. Yes, I said. Velsoth happens for us in conversation, he said. I thought about that, about what it said about the shape of each species, about what we had each been built for over millions of years by the particular world and the particular pressures that had made us. I think, I said slowly, that every species has a version of it, the moment when everything else falls away and the thing you actually are takes over, the thing under all the history and the culture and the choices. Sothra nodded. And for humanity, he said, that thing is a hunter. That thing is a hunter, I agreed. And also a doctor, and also an engineer, and also the kind of person who sits with a glass plant in a quiet room and asks careful questions about things he does not yet understand. I looked at him. We are not only one thing. No, he said, I am beginning to see that. He ended his posting on the Sarovas reached 2 days before the signal arrived. We said goodbye at the same docking bay where I had first met him, and it was a different kind of meeting than that first one had been. He stood the same way. Precise, measured. 4 eyes still and considering, but he looked at me differently. Commander Mercer, he said. Ambassador Sothra, I said. I think, he said, that humanity is going to be a great deal of trouble for the Accord, and I think the Accord is very fortunate to have you. We'll try not to be too much trouble, I said. No, he said, with something that I was fairly certain was the Velkari equivalent of a smile. You will be exactly as much trouble as necessary. I suspect that is something humans are rather good at. And then he was gone, and my crew and I were left as the primary human presence on the Sarova's reach, which was itself still a strange thought. 5 people, a single ship, a species that 40 days ago had been categorized as non-threatening, prey class, set aside for observation, told to stay out of the way. The Accord was still adjusting. We were still adjusting. There is a particular kind of weight that comes with being seen, really seen. Not the version of you that other people decide on from a distance, but the actual thing, the one that shows up under pressure when everything comfortable has been stripped away. That weight is not comfortable. It is not simple, but it is honest, and I have always preferred honest weight to comfortable lies. I was standing at the viewport, thinking about all of this, watching the stars, when Dan's voice came over the intercom. Commander, you should come to the bridge. His voice was calm, completely calm, the specific quality of calm that meant he was working very hard at it. I was moving before he finished the sentence. The bridge was quiet when I entered. Claire was at navigation, Yusuf at tactical, Leon off to one side at his secondary console. All 4 of them were looking at the main display. I walked to my chair, looked at the display, and felt that tightening behind my eyes again. That old familiar quiet in my chest. On the display, a signal was rendering, not a distress signal, something different. A structured transmission in a pattern that did not match any Accord member species in the database. Origin point, deep space, direction unknown, signal strength consistent with something very powerful broadcasting across a very large distance. Embedded in the transmission, repeating at regular intervals, was a single query in what appeared to be a near-universal mathematical base. The kind of language that assumes the recipient is intelligent, but assumes nothing else. The kind of language you use when you are reaching out to something you have not yet identified. The query translated to 6 words. Who is at our boundary? I looked at it for a long moment. Around me, my crew was quiet, ready. The same quality of attention that I had felt in the Lethara corridor, in the ambush, in the 11 minutes and 4 seconds that had changed what the Accord thought humanity was. 60,000 people on a rust-red world. 4 humans I trusted completely. 1 species, newly reclassified, still learning what it meant to be seen. And a signal from deep space asking who was here. I sat down in my captain's chair. Yusuf, I said, what are we looking at? Unknown origin, he said. No match in Accord records. Signal strength suggests something very large and very far away, or something closer that wants to appear very large. Which do you think it is? I asked. He looked at the display. I think it's far away, he said, and I think it's been watching the Val-Karith engagement. The signal origin correlates with a passive sensor signature we picked up during the battle. Something was out there, watching. The bridge was very quiet. Claire spoke first. What do we do? I looked at the signal, at the 6 words repeating in their patient, structured loop. Who is at our boundary? A question, not a threat. Not yet. The kind of question that could become either depending on the answer. I thought about Sothra and his glass plant and his careful questions. I thought about 60,000 people. I thought about 11 minutes and 4 seconds, and about Velson's report that no one had prioritized, and about the moment in the corridor of the Sarova's reach when I had first felt the Velkari watching our hands and had filed it away quietly to think about later. I thought about what humanity was, not the version from the first day, small and categorized and non-threatening, the real version, the complicated one, the hunter and the doctor and the engineer and the person who asks questions they do not yet have answers to. I thought about what we were about to carry into whatever came next. We answer, I said. Leon looked up. What do we say? I looked at the signal, at the stars beyond it, at the dark between them which was full of things we did not yet know and things that did not yet know us. We say exactly who we are, I said, all of it, no smaller, no safer. I opened the response channel. And we introduced ourselves.